chapter 11. Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. So originally, man had just one language. Now we don't know what that language is. My guess is it wasn't English. But there was just one language that men used to communicate with, and everybody spoke the same language. This may be, even though we don't know what it may be the language we use in heaven someday. I've got to believe that in heaven we're all going to speak the same language, don't you think? So whatever the language was, probably it's the language we're going to use in glory one day. They were told after the flood to repopulate the earth and to spread abroad. But as they come to this place in the land of Shinar, we know that as Babylon, they attempt to disobey the command of God and initiate a false form of worship and build a place where they would gather in one spot, and that would keep them from spreading abroad. So they're deliberately disobeying God. Verses 3 and 4. They said, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise we will be scattered abroad over the face of the earth." Now this group is being led by Nimrod. And even back then, they knew how to make brick. By the way, evolution says that man started out as a monkey and came on up and was a caveman and then finally came to where we are today. I believe there were cavemen, yes. But where I would put them is after what happens here. That's where I think men started out perfect and sin caused them to fall low. And especially after the Tower of Babel, when God scatters them everywhere, I think that's where men ended up living in caves for a time. That's where I would put it anyway. Maybe you've got a different idea, but I think that was probably as good a place as any. But what they're doing is in direct opposition to the command of God. The building of a city was for the purpose of congregating in one place. So here is the first city that we know about in Scripture. And the building of the tower to heaven was for their own pride. They did not really think they could reach heaven. Man knows better than that. But they wanted a high tower to their own accomplishment. For some reason, men like to be remembered and they want monuments to themselves. And this is what was going to be remembered for this group of people in their minds. Verses 5 to 7. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people. They all have the same language. And this is what they began to do. And now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech." God sees it all, of course. And with the accomplishment accomplishment of what they were doing here, they would be encouraged to do other things that would also boost their pride. This was to be a world empire in opposition to God. I think that's what's going on here. There was nothing to restrain them from their project, since they all spoke the same language. Now, man is a very capable creature. We have accomplished a lot and seen a lot been accomplished in our lifetimes even. I mean, everybody here remembers a time when there were no computers, no cell phones, and we have all that stuff now. I mean, that is a big step forward for mankind. And now we're talking about having machines think for us. I think that's a big mistake, but that's what's happening in our world. The tower was a ziggurat, and it was a religious tower. In later times, these were built as places of sacrifice. You remember the Mayan Indians and some of the Aztecs down in South America and such. They built these kinds of towers, and they used them for human sacrifice. Now, this was probably not the case here, but it was clearly in rebellion against God. So God, and notice that God refers to himself as us, plural, just like he did in the beginning, the first chapter of Genesis. This is the Godhead that's speaking to himself. They decided to confuse the speech of mankind so they couldn't communicate to build. Now, I'm just trying to imagine the first time one guy said, "Pass me another brick," and it didn't come out like that. And they couldn't understand what they were saying, and how surprising and shocked and upset that must have made everyone. And obviously there probably were several different languages, because God wanted to split them up into several different groups so they would go different places. Verses 8 and 9. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. Because God confused their language, they were forced to go only with those they understood. That makes sense, doesn't it? So they would move together and congregate together with those of the same language. That's the idea. The confusing of language led to the scattering of the people, and I think different nations. And I think this may have been the point at which races started to be developed. It would seem that at first most men were probably of a darker skin color, and that lighter skinned people developed as they moved to colder climates, and even darker skin as they moved to warmer climates. And over time, these changes would take place. At any rate, all the races came from the sons of Noah, from the genetic material that was present in those three boys, and their wives, of course. Now, the name Babel is linked to the Hebrew word which means to confuse. And we use that term somewhat in our language even. We say, that I couldn't understand him, they were just babbling. That's where we get that term, to confuse, babble. From this, Israel came to understand the beginnings of the nations, and also the rebellious origins of Babylon. And throughout the Bible, Babylon is a place that stands in opposition to God. That's especially true in the book of Revelation. God forces them to scatter after they've tried to establish themselves in just one place. He judged them by confusing their language with multiple tongues. Now, strangely enough, on the day of Pentecost, he gave the apostles the ability to speak in multiple tongues so they could understand what he wanted them to do. Here, he confuses them so they'll do what he wants them to do. Verses 10 and 11. These are the records of the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and became the father of Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived 500 years after he became the father of Arphaxad, and he had other sons and daughters. So Shem lived a total of 600 years, not as long as his father lived, and not nearly as long as those who lived before the flood. You know, they were living over 900 years. And we're going to see how the lifespans decrease little by little in the generations to come as well. By the time we get to Abraham in the next chapter, but there's hundreds of years in there, obviously. By the time we get to Abraham, he only lives to be 175, and he was unusually old at that time. His son, Isaac, lives to be 180. He really got blessed, didn't he? But Jacob only lives to be 130. Now, Shem's line is followed here because he's the one through Abram would come. And the genealogy takes us from Shem to Abram. And notice also that the age at which each one begins to have children, that decreases too. Verses 12 through 25. We're going to take a big section here because this is somewhat genealogy. Arphaxad lived 35 years and became the father of Shelah. And Arphaxad lived 403 years after he became the father of Shelah, and he had other sons and daughters. Shelah lived 30 years and became the father of Eber. And Shelah lived 403 years, and he became the father after he became the father of Eber, and he had other sons and daughters. Oh, let me pause here for a second. Mark just told me something of interest. He said that Josephus says that Adam and Eve had 55 children. We've talked about that a little bit. That evidently that's just what was believed by the Jews. Maybe it was true. I don't know. I don't know how anyone would know how many kids they had. But think of that, having 55 kids. Wow. Eber lived 34 years and became the father of Peleg, and Eber lived 430 years after he became the father of Peleg, and he had other sons and daughters. Peleg lived 30 years and became the father of Reu, and Peleg lived 209 years after he became the father of Reu, and he had other sons and daughters. Reu lived 32 years and became the father of Serug, and Reu lived 207 years after he became the father of Serug, and he had other sons and daughters. Serug lived 30 years and became the father of Nahor, and Serug lived 200 years after he became the father of Nahor, and he had other sons and daughters. Nahor lived 29 years and became the father of Terah, and Nahor lived 119 years after he became the father of Terah, and he had other sons and daughters. Now I want you to notice the difference between the ages from Arphaxad, who lived 438 years, it would seem, to Nahor, who only lives 148 years. So in these generations that are listed here, the lifespan has been cut to more than 1/3 of what it was before the flood. At the age at which they begin having children goes from 100 with Shem to 29 with Nahor. Now here's another interesting fact from all of this. Abraham would have been 58 when Noah died. So Abraham could have known Noah. Not that he did, but that was a possibility. You know, you don't think about things like that. But because people were living so long, that was a possibility that could have happened. 26 through 30. Terah lived 70 years and became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the records of the generations of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran became the father of Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his birth, in Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took wives for themselves. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Sarai was barren. She had no child. Now, from what is said here, it would seem to imply that Abram was the first or oldest of the sons of Terah. But actually, we find out later he was the youngest of Terah's sons. And the only reason he's mentioned first is because he's the one we're going to focus on. He's the most important one. That's why he's listed first. Nahor was actually the oldest. And it would seem that Terah was 70 when Abram was born, and that they left Ur of Chaldees when Abram was 75. This would mean they spent 60 years in Haran. Now, I don't think that's correct. One explanation of this is that the text was miscopied or something, and the length of Terah's life should be 145 years, but it would seem easier to accept the fact, I think, that Abram was not born until Terah was 130. That explains it easily. Now notice that Nahor, the one married Nahor's daughter, and Milcah, which was his niece. And Haran died before they left for Haran. Now the name Abram means exalted father. That's what the name Abram means. Last two verses of this chapter. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans in order to enter the land of Canaan. And they went as far as Haran and settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. You see here again, it doesn't make sense that they spent 60 years in Haran on their way to Canaan. I think they spent about 5 years there, not 60 years there. So it's much more reasonable that Terah was feeble. They had to stop for a time there in Haran, and they established perhaps and named that place after their son, which was Haran. That's why the names are the same there. And on their way to Canaan, and finally Terah dies there. So all of this is what happens in the first 11 chapters. And by the way, everything that's in these first 11 chapters, critics of the Bible want to say is impossible to know. You know, this is all, it's just somebody's fanciful imagination about what all happened. It's a big fairy tale. It's a story. It's not history. God says it's history. And Jesus speaks about the people from this age as they were real people and these things really happened. So if you're going to believe Jesus, you got to believe this is history. Now that's my take on it all. Chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." Chapter 12 marks a great division in the book of Genesis. Up to this point, we've had great events that have happened in the book of Genesis that have affected the whole of mankind. Now we're turning to focus on a certain individual rather than the whole body of people that are on the earth. We're going to find here that God's promise in chapter 3, verse 15, is to be fulfilled through the family of Abraham. And I think at this point, this is the first time that Satan understands who he needs to work on. Before it was everybody, because he didn't know where the Messiah was going to come from. But now he knows it's going to be through Abraham. And so the first 11 chapters of Genesis are the focus of criticism and ridicule by those who would doubt the Word of God. Even more conservative scholars have come to accept these chapters as poetic rather than history. But if we allow that to be true, then how can we be sure that any of the rest is factual too? You see, folks, if you allow one mistake in God's Word, then how do you know there aren't other mistakes? Now, this is what I've heard this argued at some length, by the way, several years back. And Jack Cottrell really shut down the other guy great in this discussion, they called it. It was really a big debate that they had at the North American. This was back in the 80s. Jack took the position that there were no mistakes in the Bible. The other guy allowed for mistakes in the Bible. And people that take that position would say that the mistakes are in science and history and things like that really don't matter. But in matters of faith, you can trust the Bible. That's what they would say. But you have to understand, if you can't trust the Bible in areas where you can test it, science, history, etc., astronomy, then how do you know you can trust it in things where you can't test it in matters of faith? You can't test it there. If you can't trust it here, then how can you trust it here? So, in my view, you either accept everything is true, or you might as well throw it all out. I think that's the only choice you have. Now, we find here that God's promise is being fulfilled, but according to Acts chapter 7, verse 2, the call to Abram first came while he was in Mesopotamia, before he ever went to Haran. God promised, first of all, this is the first promise he makes to him here in these verses, and these are very important verses in the first few verses of chapter 12. First of all, he promises to make a great nation of him. Now, that's going to be a long time being fulfilled. Abraham will never see that fulfilled in his life. He'll finally see his son born, but there will be many nations that will come from the seed of Abraham, both through Isaac and Ishmael, and through his other 7 sons. And so God promised to make a great nation of him, and we will. The great nation he really has reference here is to the Jewish people, the Hebrews. Secondly, he promises to bless him. And Abraham was certainly blessed. Before he ever gets to Canaan, he is becoming a wealthy man. And even when he disobeys God, God still allows him to be blessed, and he increases in wealth. And by the time he's living in Canaan, he has enough servants that he can raise a small army to go rescue his nephew Lot from 5 kings. That's pretty powerful. Third, he promises to make his name great. Did you know there are 3 great world religions that claim Abraham? The Jews, the Christians, and the Islamics. They all claim Abraham. So his name was fulfilled materially, his greatness in his name was fulfilled materially, spiritually, and socially. Now next it says he's going to be a blessing to others. And this was certainly true. He was a blessing to his nephew Lot in that he saved he and his family from being captured and brought him back safely. He has been a blessing, the Jewish people have been a blessing to many others down through the ages as well. And he promised to bless those that bless him and curse those that cursed him. 4 great civilizations rose up against the Jews: Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, and Rome. And all of these at one point or another, and continue to be at one point or another, punished by God. I always loved the story of the 6-Day War. You remember what happened in the 6-Day War? Now, most of the folks here were alive when that happened. That was in the 70s, I believe that took place. Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, and maybe another nation or two, all rose up against to attack Israel all at once. Israel beat them all in 6 days. I'll bless those that bless you. I'll curse those that curse you. As a matter of fact, during that 6-day war, Israel took possession of the Sinai Peninsula. Up to that point, Israel had held on to, or Egypt had held on to the Sinai Peninsula. That was their possession for hundreds and thousands of years. But Israel took it away from them. And then they gave it back. So, friends, let me just say this. Whenever Israel's in conflict, I want to be on Israel's side. Because God says he's going to bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you. I want to be on Israel's side. The final promise has to do with the coming of the Messiah through his line. And this is how all the families of the earth would be blessed, is through the coming of the Messiah. Now notice what Abraham is told to do. He's not called Abraham yet. It's Abram now. It's not Abraham. Now I'll call him Abraham because we understand who this guy is. He's told to, first of all, leave his country. This he did when he left Ur of Chaldees. Secondly, he's told to leave his relatives and his father. Why was this? Because they were idolaters. So he's told to leave his family. This he did not do. He takes his father with him and his nephew with him as well. And thirdly, he's told to go to a land I will show you. This he did not do immediately, but he moved to Haran and eventually goes to Canaan where God told him to go. 4 and 5. So Abram went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his nephew, and all their possessions which they had accumulated, and the persons which they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and thus they came to the land of Canaan. He was there quite some time, evidently, because he accumulates possessions and persons. These are servants that he's accumulating. But finally, they come to the land of Canaan. Now, the names of all these places have some significance, and we're going to get into that a little bit in the question and answers, but just so you know a little bit about this, the name for Canaan means bow the knee. These were idolaters that lived in Canaan. They were the descendants of Ham, and they were the mixed people that had among them the giants. You remember from what happened in Genesis chapter 6. And so that is of significance. The other names that are used here as well have some significance in all of it. Let me see here. They go to this place of Canaan and Haran. Haran. The name Haran, Ur of Chaldees, first of all, that's an easy. Ur of Chaldees actually means flame of destruction. That's what the name means. And he didn't do this. He left there, but he stops in Haran and goes to a place that means parched or fruitless. Why would you go there? To parched or fruitless, but that's where he went. And so all these names have some significance that's not readily seen when you first read the text. Verses 6 and 7. Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem to the oak of Moreh. Now the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." What? To your descendants I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Shechem. The name Shechem means place of strength. And it was located in a valley between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, about 15 miles northwest of Jerusalem. Moreh, the oak of Moreh, means place of instruction. This is the same place where Jesus spoke to the woman at the well, at Jacob's well. The Canaanites, of course, are going to be the ones that Israel would dispossess from this land, not the Arabs. The Canaanites. And after they came out of Egypt, this would happen, of course. Once Abram has obeyed God, God appears to him and makes a further promise, a promise to give his descendants all the land of Canaan. Now, this is an unconditional promise made to Abram and kept by God down through the ages. The Jews have not always possessed Canaan, but they have always possessed it as a nation. Yet today, they possess it as a nation. The history of this is so remarkable. Even after the captivity, they return to their own land. Carried off to Babylon, they come back to the land of Canaan. After a long absence, they were given back the land of Israel in 1948. And Israel was again established as a nation after World War II, after being scattered all over the earth. They have continued to hold this land even in spite of great opposition from the nations around them, and there has been no other nation on the face of the earth that has existed for such a long time or held their land for such a long time, with possibly one exception: Egypt. The tiny little nation of Israel has held on to their land for all these centuries. Verses 8 and 9. Then he proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev. Bethel means house of God. House of God. And you're going to see Bethel a lot in the history of Genesis. It was later named this by Abram. It's not called this yet. Later it will be named this, but this is where he stops. And Moses is recounting all this history. Ai, you remember the name Ai? Ai was 2 miles east of Bethel, and this was the second city that Israel attacked when they came in to take over the promised land. And remember, they failed to take the little city of Ai after taking the great city of Jericho, because there was sin in the camp. The Negev is the southern part of Palestine there, of Israel. It was a less desirable area. It was kind of a desolate place, not really desert, but it was better suited for raising herd animals than it was for farming. This is the area where David and his men would hide from Saul, down in the Negev. A wilderness area. At Bethel, he builds a second altar and sacrifices to the Lord, calling on his name. And I think that means that he worshiped or gave thanks to God. That's how he called on his name. Verses 10 through 13. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for a famine was severe in the land. And it came about that he came near to Egypt, and he said to Sarai his wife, "See now, I know that you are a beautiful woman. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may live on account of you." First of all, famine. We're going to see that famine happens at least 3 times in the early history of Israel. Famine, though, did not hit Egypt in the Nile River Valley because it was always green because of the Nile River. So famine was not as big a problem down in Egypt. So this would be a good place to go and to be supplied. Abram holds to God's promise. He does not go back to Ur when the famine comes, but he lacks sufficient faith to remain in the land of promise. And so he runs to Egypt. Sarai, at this point, Sarah, is 65. She's half the age that she would be when she would die, 127. And she's still a very attractive woman. So much so that Abraham is concerned for his own neck. They're going to want to take her from me and kill me. There's information in the Dead Sea Scrolls that confirms this, describing the beauty of Sarah. Abram feared that she would be taken into Pharaoh's harem and that he would be killed, and so he sought to disguise his true relationship with her. Instead of trusting God to take care of him, he asked her to protect him by telling a half-truth. Say you're my sister. That was a half-truth because she was his half-sister. Verses 14 through 16. It came about when Abram came into Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Therefore he treated Abram well for her sake and gave him sheep and oxen and donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. So just as he thought, it happened. She's taken into the house of Pharaoh. But as her brother, he is blessed with all kinds of great gifts. And he prospers because of his wife. So God blesses Abram in spite of his lack of trust and faith at this point in his life. Last few verses. But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Then Pharaoh called upon Abram and said, "What is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go." And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they escorted him away with his wife and all that belonged to him. Before a woman could go in to a ruler in ancient times, you remember the story of Esther, she had to go through an extensive period of preparation. And this many times took a year or 2 years for this period of preparation. It's during this time, evidently, that God intervenes for Abram and protects her by punishing Pharaoh. And Pharaoh gets the message. We're not told how, but Pharaoh puts the whole story together and he confronts Abram with it. He returns his wife to him, sends him out of the country with everything that he'd been given. He doesn't take it all back. He lets him go, and he even escorts him out. He sends a guard with him to watch over him as they go. So in all of this, Pharaoh actually shows more integrity than does Abraham. Now, folks, maybe you don't like to hear these things about some of our biblical heroes, but it ought to give you a little encouragement. God has always used weak people. And that's why he can use you and me. That should encourage us. Let's look at our questions. Number 6, Abram's ancestry to Noah. Here's the line. Terah, who's the father of Abraham, Terah, T-E-R-A-H. Nahor was his father, N-A-H-O-R. Serug, S-E-R-E-G. Reu, R-E-U. Peleg, P-E-L-E-G. What do we remember him for? In his days, the earth was divided. Eber, E-B-E-R. Shelah, S-H-E-L-A-H. Arpachshad, A-R-P-A-C-H-S-H-A-D. Shem and Noah. 10 generations. Number 7. Who were they? In 11:2. It came about as they journeyed east. They here is the children of men, the whole earth. And who was their leader? Nimrod from 10:10. Nimrod was the great leader. Number 8. Abram's wife, Sarai, was his half-sister. Nahor's wife, Milcah, M-I-L-C-A-H, was his niece. They married close relatives back then. Because again, the gene pool hasn't been as corrupted as it is today. Number 9, the meaning of Babel. Babel means confusion. And in contrast, the name Bethel means house of God. In Hebrew, the term El is God, and Beth is house, and so Beth El is house of God. Number 10. Abram brought from Egypt what? Well, he brought his wife, Lot, cattle, herdsmen, sheep, oxen, and donkeys. He went out a whole lot wealthier than he went in. Number 11. The evils in 11:4. About building this city and the tower and all that. Well, first of all, there was disobedience. There's undoubtedly here an element of false worship that they were seeking to do. And there was also pride. They wanted to make a name for themselves. Number 12, the time between Nimrod and Peleg. There were just 2 generations. And then the time between Peleg and Abram, there were 5 generations. Number 13. Where was it said? Now the Lord said to Abram. Where did he say it? Well, he said it in Ur of Chaldees. In Ur of the Chaldees. And that's according to Acts 7:2. And how old was Abram when that was said to him? Well, he must have been 70 years old. Number 14. The mistakes that he made here in chapters 11 and 12. Well, first of all, he didn't leave his relatives. That's one of the things God told him to do that he didn't do. He didn't leave his idolatrous relatives. Second mistake he made, he went to Egypt. He shouldn't have done that. He should have trusted God and stayed right where he was. And finally, he lied about his wife. Second part of this, the meaning of Abram. Abram means exalted father. And Sarai means diminutive. Diminutive. Last question. Explain the Canaanites. These are descendants of fallen angels and human women. And also residents of Canaan. That's really what Canaanite means. It's a resident of Canaan, but I think more importantly it's the fact of where they came from and why God wanted them wiped out, just like with the flood. All right, questions now.
This tower in Babel, I read one time about a tower, I think it's Babel, but where each brick was inscribed with the name of their false god.
Oftentimes that's what these towers would have. Men, the whole idea of building a tower to heaven is to worship something. You know you aren't going to build it that tall. So the idea of building a tower is to worship something. And we don't know what they decided that they were going to worship that was false. Maybe it was the stars, the sun. You know, that would have been an early thing that men would look at and say, boy, that must be wondrous up there. We better build a tower to it or something, you know. So I don't know what it was, but they were certainly seeking to worship something that they should not have been worshiping.
They did want to make a name for themselves, and maybe it was the city's name or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so God took care of them real quick, though. Anything else?
Well, you talked about Nimrod building the city. Cain, back in chapter 4, was building a city.
That's true. He built the first city, didn't he? You're right. I was wrong there. I said this was the first city. No, Cain had the first city.
Me? All right. You know, it's interesting. God has always had a way of humbling humanity, especially when they get a little too big for their britches. I think about the Titanic, the unsinkable ship, the ship that God himself couldn't sink.
Yeah. And, his first voyage.
Yeah.
Down it goes.
That's right.
That's a good illustration of this, isn't it? Yes, Janie.
It's about the descendants of the fallen angels and human women. I thought they were gotten rid of in the flood.
What it says there in chapter 6 is both before and after the flood. So it happened not only before, but it happened somewhere after the flood as well. Because when they come into Canaan, they're all these giant guys like Goliath and others, you know. Yeah. How would you like to have to go up against a guy that's, 10 foot tall? Wow.
He needs a slingshot. He needs a slingshot.
By the way, David, when he stopped at the creek there, he picked up 5 stones. You know why he picked up 5 stones?
No.
Well, this is a true story. Yeah, he's already laughing, thinking I'm going to tell a joke. Probably because Goliath had 4 brothers. We're told about them later. And I'll bet you could, at a distance, you see the army standing there. You could see all these big, tall guys standing there. So David picks up enough rocks to get them all. But once he gets the first one, the rest of them run. Anything else? Yes.
Did you tell us what Jack Cottrell said, or did I fall asleep for a second? When you were talking about at the North American and Jack Cottrell really...
Oh yeah, Jack Cottrell really took a firm and great position and argued very succinctly for the inerrancy of Scripture. That was really a great. I have the video of that somewhere. We had 2 sessions of that, and let me tell you, I still remember my dad, my brothers, and I were all down there in front cheering old Jack on. But you could not believe, there were like 500 people in that section. You could not believe the people that stood and cheered after this guy got up and said there were mistakes in the Bible. It was just unbelievable. I could talk a lot about that, but boy, yeah, my dad told him afterwards, Jack had a prepared paper that he'd passed out beforehand, so the other guy knew exactly what he was going to say, and he got to speak second. Jack spoke first, and he spoke second in the first session. And then in the second session, he was supposed to go first, and Jack was supposed to go second. But when it came time to start, he didn't show up. And we sat there for 20 minutes waiting for the guy. And we all think he deliberately came late, thinking that Jack would go ahead and he'd have the last word again. But Jack wouldn't start. And they just took the time away from him, and it was great. It really was. All right, folks, let's have a closing word of prayer. Thank you, Father, for your word, and thank you for the things you revealed to us through it. We ask that we might continue to increase our knowledge and our faith. Give us your blessing as we leave tonight. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.